Hello and welcome to part 1 of episode 100 of the Movies in a Podshell podcast, the podcast where we take a theme and we pick 2 films to fit that theme, but not this week and not for the next few weeks, as we'll be having an absolute Hitchcockathon coming your way. We've got a 3-part episode which includes part 1, which is tonight, The Wrong Man. So we'll be discussing the silent eras, the 30s and the 40s. We've got part 2 on the way, which will be, in my opinion, the greatest decade by a single director, which will be the 50s. And then finally, we'll have a part 3, which I've aptly called a slasher, a creature feature, The Birds is a creature feature, a giallo, a thief, which will be the 60s and 70s. As always, I'm joined by the right man. You can call him John, and we're very, very excited to be joined by what can only be described as a Hitchcock expert, Tony Lee Morale. So, Tony, please welcome to the pod. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Bro, well, so, I mean, the reason why we invited you was because, you've done, I think, five books on Hitchcock at this point.
I have written 5 books. My 5th book, A Century of Hitchcock, is coming out next year by University Press of Kentucky, and that's to celebrate the centenary, obviously, of Hitchcock's first film, The Pleasure Garden, in 1926. So literally 100 years of Hitchcock.
It's incredible, really, to think that it's been that long, and he's done so many films and only stopped making films in the 70s. It's amazing.
Yes, the book actually is 100 years of his first film and 50 years since his last film, Family Plot, in 1976. So it's well timed.
Amazing. I'm quite excited for that myself. Normally, we would normally start the pod and we talk about what we've been watching, but all I've been watching actually is Hitchcock. I've got one thing to talk about, but first, as always, you can find us. You can go on moviesinapodshell.sumupstore.com and you can buy yourself a t-shirt, which is only £18, and it's pre-shrunk cotton, as you're well aware. You can find us on YouTube, where this episode will be. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, the podcast, wherever you get them, and we'll be on the 29th of this month. We are going to be doing a Hitchcock double bill at the Mockingbird Cinema. That's going to be where we're going to be screening Notorious and Vertigo back to back. It starts at 12. It finishes at 5, so you can get home for your dinner and your kids and all that kind of stuff, whatever you need to do. And yeah, we're super excited about that. And all you'll get from us is a small introduction at the beginning, so it's not too self-indulgent. So we're excited about that. And the tickets are only £12. It's ridiculous, really. How could we possibly make any money off this? Spoiler, we probably aren't. Anyway, so I thought we'd maybe start the pod and kind of get to know Tony a little bit. And so I had a few opening questions for Tony, which just to get to know him a little bit. And then we can talk about kind of Hitchcock's early life and I guess the silent era and the 30s and 40s. So Tony, I would ask you what drew you to Hitchcock, but you have a lot of passion for complicated artists, it seems, with your extensive work on Pablo Picasso, Friedrich Nietzsche, and of course, Alfred Hitchcock. So is there something in particular that you could point to that draws you to these guys?
Well, I think the 3 of them have great things in common in film, in art, and in philosophy. And they're great 19th, 20th century icons, really, and they're basically influence the landscape of the 20th century. If you think of Hitchcock and his film work, Picasso with art and modern art, and even though Friedrich Nietzsche died in 1900, his legacy very much lived on throughout certainly the first half of the 20th century and beyond. So they're really great cultural giants in their field, and great mark of a giant and an artist is how they've influenced so many others. Many other artists and thinkers and filmmakers, especially in the case of Hitchcock. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very much drawn to those cultural icons and giants who are really groundbreaking and really disrupt the norm. When you think of Picasso and obviously his Cubist period, or Friedrich Nietzsche saying God is dead, which was really revolutionary in the 1840s. And Hitchcock himself, because of his span, he really invented cinema and the genre itself, because his legacy spans the history of cinema, which we'll go on to talk about from the silent era, to something like Psycho in 1959, which was very groundbreaking. and obviously influenced a whole wave of directors and movie makers and a whole genre of a slasher thriller and a horror movie. So he really is the epitome of a filmmaker of the 20th century.
And would you say that's what drew you to Hitchcock in the first place? Because obviously he's way before your time as well. But so what was it about him that kind of fascinated you? Because I assume you're fascinated by him writing lots of books about him, for example. And so yeah, what was it about that?
Well, I first saw my first Hitchcock movie when I was 10 or 11, and that made a huge impression on me. It was I Confess. And I was just immediately struck. I didn't really know the name Hitchcock apart from those Alfred Hitchcock investigator books. I don't know if you remember them as a child. There were three investigators, a very famous series of books, and Alfred Hitchcock. It was called Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. And he would lend his name and his image to mystery novels in the 50s and 60s. So I think I picked up my first Alfred Hitchcock Investigates book when probably I was 6 years old. So I knew the name. I didn't see his first film until I was 10. And I was just immediately struck by the moral ambiguity and the characters and the dilemma. And it's about a priest, Montgomery Clift, who, in confession, a murderer confesses to him. But because of his priestly vows, he can't tell who the murderer is. And then he becomes implicated in the murder himself, and he becomes the suspect. And so it's such classic Hitchcock.
Yeah.
When you think of that kind of, I know you're going to go on to talk about Notorious and Vertigo, but it's that kind of moral ambiguity and all the grey areas which make Hitchcock so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched a few for the first time over the last couple of weeks, which I'm quite excited to talk about because they've even blown my mind, and I'd seen quite a few Hitchcocks before this. We actually had a question that you've actually answered already, but Film Forager wrote in, she said, can you remember the first movie of his you saw and how did you react? And so obviously you've mentioned I Confess. John, I'm eager to know, what was your first that you watched?
I am 90 to 100%. I say 90% plus sure it's The Bird. So I went with my parents to France in somewhere around 2000, and there was a museum at the time which had a big, had loads of props from the Hitchcock films. So I'd seen clips from all these films with no context, and I'll be honest, I took bits and pieces, but The Birds was something I'd seen culturally or whatever, just through the zeitgeist, knew what it was. And then I remember watching it on TV the first time being terrified because it's a creature feature or almost like a horror film, really. It's not the most, it's quite plot-like for a Hitchcock film, I'd say. It's not the most obvious one, but that's the one for me. I'm pretty sure, at least all the way through. I may have seen other ones partly, but yeah. How about yourself? Sorry, Jeremy.
Well, this is hilarious. It's not technically Hitchcock, but I'm quite sure the first experience I had with I can't even call it his work, but it was actually the colour version by Gus Van Sant of Psycho, which was made in 1998. That was the first one with Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. Obviously, that's not technically a Hitchcock film, but I remember
the 90s one.
Yeah, late 90s. So I remember. And please, I'm so sorry to everyone. I remember really enjoying it, but I was also probably about 12 years old, so I'm aware that it's awful. But I think that the first one I actually saw would have been Psycho.
Yeah, I was going to say Psycho for me, definitely at college we did, because they did I've got here a book I showed Tony and Jamie just before, which is the Alfred Hitchcock's book of storyboards, and I remember being spoken to. So I studied film and TV at college and then at university, and they took the storyboards of the shower sequence from Psycho and said, this is one of the first big examples of storyboarding and how you utilize it, etc. And then watching that, and even now it's still a very effective scene. Parts of it are obviously dated, but just through the sheer technique of how it's presented, it still has a great effect. And it's just the score for me. I think, Tony, you might have guessed by a lot of my questions I've put forward, a lot of them revolve around Hitchcock and music. So I love the way he utilises his scores, especially the relationship with Bernard Herrmann. But anyhow, I'm jumping ahead. James,
no, I'm very happy to talk about that. I'm a big fan too.
Excellent. Well, what I'll do is I'll splice in some questions like that in a short while. So yeah, it's interesting to hear, because I confess, it's not one of his. I would say it's not one of his ones that is the most prominent that people think about. So it's interesting that was the first one that you came across. So I guess in this episode, I really wanted to. It's a feast for the listeners, really. Like they do love Hitchcock, and they love it when we talk about Hitchcock and review his films. I think the first Hitchcock film we ever reviewed was Frenzy, which I actually, one of my absolute favourites, that doesn't get talked about much at all. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of educate the audience and bring someone in that can tell us more than me and John will ever know about Hitchcock. So I thought we could start off with talking about Hitchcock's early life and kind of what kind of an upbringing he had, and what kind of got him into films. So, Tony, could you give a brief kind of like overview of what that would look like?
Sure. Well, he was born in 1899 in Leytonstone in East London, and his father was a greengrocer, and he had a very kind of middle-class upbringing, very much revolved around food. As a child, he did have a sister and a brother, and he was very much an observer. He would sit in the corner and watch people, and that's where his kind of love of voyeurism started. And as he grew older, when he became a teen, he loved going to plays. Famously, he really enjoyed the play Mary Rose by J.M. Barrie, and always wanted to make that as a film. And he started first with a telegraph company as a kind of doing architectural drawings, and that led him to become a title designer for an American film company at the time called Famous Players Lasky. They were looking for someone to do those kind of silent film movie titles, which you see, in the credits, the opening credits, or the subtitles. And so that's where his love of film started, really, through that kind of technical drawing and through that through plays. And then he started reading the trade papers as a young man. He famously said he would read, the London equivalent of Variety or the Hollywood Reporter at the time. And so that became where his strong interest in cinema began.
And so there's a few things. Well, there's a couple of things that happened as he was growing up. So one of the famous stories was this police cell incident. So
if it's true. So Tony, to your knowledge, and before we go into it, is what we're about to say true about this police cell incident?
Yes, yeah. He often quotes it in interviews, even with famous people like Truffaut or Peter Bogdanovich. So undoubtedly it is true. He says at the age of 5 years old, he did some kind of minor infraction, and to teach him his lesson, his father gave him a note and told him to go to the local police station, and he gave it to the police officer and was locked in a cell for 5 minutes. And apparently, it was a lesson. This is what we do to naughty boys. And famously, that's where his fear of the police comes from, why you always see the wrongfully accused man being chased by the police or being locked up. If you think of Cary Grant in North by Northwest, or most famously Robert Donat in the 39 Steps. Yeah. So there's that chase movie element, which he's very fond of.
Do you know, it was crazy. My mum did. We shouldn't quite go to that extreme, but I'll never forget. I'd done some minor infraction. She was quite the disciplinarian, and she drove me to the police station and told me to get out. And she was like, "Get out and go to the police station." And I was like, I remember just being terrified. And yeah, that was I think I behaved myself.
You didn't develop into Hitchcock with this amazing artist and background, unfortunately, Jamie. But hey ho, we are where we are.
Let's be honest. I don't have the talent or the ideas or anything along those lines, bro. So he went into like engineering because he was supporting his mother after his father died in 1914. So that was happening as well. But then the first film that he made was The Pleasure Garden in 1925. Is this?
But didn't he get uncredited for work he did on Number 13? Isn't that the first official one? Tony can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, he was an assistant director with a couple of movies. He was working after Famous Players Lasky. he started working for Gainsborough under Michael Balcon, who saw his talent, recognised his talent. There was some rivalry when he was working as an assistant director with Graham Cutts, but he did have credit as an AD for Graham Cutts on films where he also worked alongside Alma Reville, who he later married. But yes, number 13 is, I think it's like 1922.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow. So yeah. Well, so I've got here the first like credited film was The Pleasure Garden 1925, which was filmed in Germany, and so that was he got exposed to German expressionism over there, and so I did want to ask about kind of German expressionism in his work, because it was when I was I'd mostly watched kind of the 50s and some of the late 40s and the early 60s, but I hadn't really gone back to. So I have this little one here, which is the Silent to Sound. This is his early work. So this goes from The Ring, which I did watch. So The Ring, which is the first one on here, it's got the farmer's wife, but it goes all the way to. It's got number 17 on here, but that's 1932. But I think that's a different version. But it was obviously also got the transition to the talkie, which was Blackmail, which we can go in a little bit more detail. But when I was watching some of these films from the 30s, I actually did see, because I quite like Fritz Lang, and M is one of my favourite films from the early 1930s, and so I did see some. I was like, do you know what? Hitchcock and Fritz Lang have got quite a lot in common, it seems, and so. Where, in your opinion, Tony, where do you think there is? He has taken a lot from Germany and those directors.
Absolutely, because he was working as an AD, as I said, for Graham Cutts, and they were filming one of the films over at the UFA Studios in Germany, in Berlin, and he spent several months there, and he said in interviews later he observed Fritz Lang, he observed F.W. Murnau. He remembers watching The Last Laugh with the actor Emil Jannings. I cover a lot of this in my Century of Hitchcock book, and the influence of German expressionism. And just to clarify for the listener what German expressionism is, it's basically a style where they use shadows, forced perspectives, directly influenced from that kind of German cinema, where they're very interested in the psychology of the characters, like a kind of film noir, which was developed later in America in 1940s. But that's what German expressionism and distorted angles and forced perspectives are very important.
So what comes to mind with that kind of style, and I say more modern, it's still probably 1989 when it was, but it's like Tim Burton with Batman. I feel like that has those kind of elements with like the over caricature of like the city is such a big character and it's very oversized, and like I feel like that kind of carries over a little bit, maybe, but hey ho.
I agree. Yeah,
astonished that you've managed to link Tim Burton with that, John.
Well,
that's incredible. No, you're right. No, it's of course, bro. And so we have a question here, and someone has asked, what do you see, Tony, as when Hitchcock became Hitchcock, like the first real Hitchcockian film? I know. So yeah, in your opinion.
Yeah, well, it definitely wasn't The Pleasure Garden, because that was very much an experiment in Germany, because they wanted to see if they could make a couple of films in Germany in using the German technicians and the studios, and also as a commercial venture, as a German co-production. The very first Hitchcock film, which he recognises, is The Lodger, with Ivor Novello. And it has all the classic tropes: the wrongfully accused man, the villain, the psychopath, because the lodger upstairs is wrongfully accused of murdering, the blonde heroine. And you see those famous trademark Hitchcock shots. The one in the lodger, very famous, you've got the footsteps walking over the glass ceiling. And so the people underneath looking up and seeing the lodger pacing up and down. That's classic Hitchcock. He loved having those extra shots in his films, those what he would call icebox shots in Vertigo. There are quite a few of them. And so the audience would talk about them at the end of the movie or would remember them.
Oh, a water cooler moment when people
Yeah,
would
exactly.
kind of
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
in the 50s, they obviously had ice boxes, so they
Yeah.
would reach into a refrigerator after a movie for the equivalent of Haagen-Dazs and, talk about the movie.
That's so interesting. So it was ice. It used to be in ice parks. Now it's what you'd know as a water cooler moment.
Yeah.
John, you watched The Lodger. Am I right?
I did indeed. Yep.
Yeah. And what did you think about it?
It's
your
the
earliest
first,
film.
in my mind, it was exactly what you said. It's all those elements with the wrong man, with the chase element, and all of those Hitchcockian motifs coming together. Obviously, it's a silent movie, but I very much enjoyed it. I feel like I could see the line to where we get to 39 steps. It felt like I could see the transition of like where it was going to go, and I think for me. And it's interesting because we've got a few examples where he remakes his films. Man Who Knew Too Much, for example, in the 30s, and then remade again later with Jimmy Stewart. It's almost like perfecting a style. Like, I don't want to boil it down saying all Hitchcock films are the same, because I watched Lifeboat yesterday, which was a completely different kind of story and tale, and doesn't follow any of the usual Hitchcockian tropes. But there is a set style which he does have, which he perfected. Now, Jamie, cheekily, we were talking yesterday about The Saboteur, and you said it was very similar to 39 Steps, but 39 Steps in America. And there is an element of that kind of moulding and shaping that style till it's nailed down. And I think North by Northwest is the culmination of like 20 or 30 years worth of getting that style nailed down to the best box office hit one, with an incredible score by Bernard Herrmann. Yes, Gab.
Can I?
But, so yeah.
I did want to ask Tony. So, in your opinion, am I ill placed to say something like that? So, I was saying to John. So, I did quite a run of Hitchcock's lately, but I did watch the 39 Steps, and then I watched Saboteur very close together. And so I text John jokingly and says, Saboteur I didn't like as much as the 39 Steps, and I said it basically feels like the 39 Steps does America. And so would you agree that there are a little bit like that?
Oh, absolutely. He would take the template, The Man on the Run, and remake it. So the 39 Steps is often seen as foreshadowing North by Northwest.
Yes.
As well as Saboteur. I think Saboteur, they didn't have a benefit of a strong character actor like Robert Donat, who's absolutely fantastic in the 39 Steps, And he won the Academy Award a couple of years later for Goodbye, Mr. Chips. So really the presence of a strong actor, you needed a Robert Donat or a Cary Grant to pull it. And I think he wasn't pleased with Robert Cummings for Saboteur. He felt a bit let down by the leads, Priscilla Lane and Robert Cummings. And they weren't strong enough to hold the movie, because if you're going to do a chase movie, you've really got to care about the characters. So you're being pulled along with them, and you really care about Robert Donat and Madeleine Carroll because they're very charismatic.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. So I didn't manage to see The Lodger because let's be honest. I'll be quite frank with the audience right now. There is no chance I'm going to be able to watch all the Hitchcock films before we end these 3 episodes. Yeah, I've done my best, and so we're going to get through quite a chunk of them.
You've done pretty well this week with bulking through.
I had to pick and choose. Yeah, so there's a few specific ones that I do want to talk about, but I was quite surprised to see in his really early stuff in the silent films that he was doing quite a lot. Well, I say quite a lot, but he was doing a few comedies, and he obviously is a very funny man and has these films that shouldn't be funny. His later ones always have some very funny moments. Like his black humor is brilliant, and so you kind of see in a couple of the early films. Which was one of the ones I was going to mention. So Champagne was one of the ones I was going to mention, which is obviously is a comedy, a silent comedy. So it's in 2025, even someone like me who is open to any kind of cinema, and film noir is one of my favorite genres. It's a tough sell. It's a difficult watch. But it's interesting to see how he is actually very versatile, and he's got all sorts in his locker, and he was showing that from a very early time in his kind of late 20s.
That morose kind of morbid humour though is kind of what carries the films and gives. I think the reason one of the reasons people like Hitchcock's films is because they're layered. You've got the kind of dramatic murder or whatever else in the chase, but you've also kind of got black comedy in these moments. Like Jamie and I'll be honest, the one that really, I say spoke to me, the one that really shocked me, let's say, of the most recent ones we watched was Sabotage. So Sabotage is the 1936, and due to the censorship at the time, I was staggered at what got across in terms of what they could and couldn't say, what they could and couldn't show. And also just how a film from 1936 can build up so much tension in a sequence really surprised me. I don't know. I think that one stuck with me the most because of... I don't know. Are we doing spoilers for Sabotage? Like, how far do we go into this? It's difficult, isn't it?
I do want to spoil Sabotage in a minute. Can we, before we jump there,
Sorry.
can we? No, it's fine. Can we talk about his 10th film, Blackmail, which was when he transitioned. He transitioned from silent to sound. It was. Am I right in saying it was the first British film that had sound? Is that right? And so that was. It was a play by Charles Bennett, premiered at a London theatre in 1928. I've watched a documentary on this, by the way. A lot of his films were based off existing works, but Charles Bennett, I think, went on to write or co-write seven Hitchcock films. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Tony. Which some of those were The Man Who Knew Too Much. He did Sabotage. He did The 39 Steps. He did Saboteur, and I think he didn't do North by Northwest, but that was another original screenplay. So the transition. Would you be able to talk a little bit about Hitchcock's opinion of sound and bringing that into films in the late 1920s? Yes,
I mean he basically started the whole talkies, as they called them, the talking pictures in 1929, and again he's being a pioneer. He's a groundbreaker because he instinctively knew how to use sound, not just as what he would call pictures of people talking, but the very famous sequence with Annie Andre and the knife, and the repetition of the word knife, and the knife, because the Gareth's neighbour is talking about the knife, and so he's just so clever like that, which is why he's a genius. You know, he just immediately takes something new and sets a standard, sets a ball mark, just like, as I was saying earlier, with someone like Picasso, and reinvents the whole genre right from the beginning. And so that's Hitchcock for you, and Blackmail.
Yeah. So and it was quite, when I was reading about Blackmail, it was quite interesting to hear about Annie Andre, because she was she German? Am I
Czech.
right? Czech. So she was Czech. Yeah. And so the film was originally supposed to be silent, but and I think it was made in silent first, and then they shot it for sound. And so it was interesting because Annie Andre had a Czech accent, and so that film actually she didn't have many acting parts after that, which I found really interesting. And it's kind of obviously referenced in
Babylon.
Babylon, but also the actual original. I can't remember. It's one of my favorite. Singing in the Rain.
Singing in the Rain. Sorry,
because obviously one of the actors in that, I can't remember her name, as she can't sing. Her voice is terrible. So we're actually having this like dubbed over. So it's interesting to find that what the talkies did to certain actors, when I guess you've got this mystique of this beautiful actress and you don't know what she sounds like, and when you do, it's like, oh, actually, like maybe the accent doesn't go at that time. So that was something really, I just found it really, really interesting. So cool. So once
there's that very, very famous clip on YouTube. If people are listening, you can listen to Annie Andre and the kind of screen test where Hitchcock's ribald comedy is coming out, and Annie Andre is saying, "Oh, Hitch, I don't speak well," and the Hitchcock says, "Why? Have you been a bad woman or something?" You know, it's just classic.
Yes,
Hitchcock.
I've seen this. Yeah, brilliant.
Now, Miss Andre, you asked me to let you hear your voice on the talking picture.
But Hitch, you mustn't do that.
Why not?
Well, because I can speak well.
Do you realize the squad van will be here any moment?
No, really. Oh, my God, I'm terribly frightened.
Why? Have you been a bad woman or something?
Well, not just bad, but...
But you've slept with men.
Oh, no!
You have not. Come here. Stand in your place. Otherwise, it will not come out right, as the girl said to the soldier. That's enough.
So just before we move on to, I guess, a little bit later on, Alma Revel, which is his editor and his assistant director in the 1920s, Hitchcock was quoted saying, the Hitchcock touch had 4 hands and 2 of them were Alma's. Do you think there's a specific film from the British era that you can see her influence the most, or like where you could say like that's more her than him?
Well, people often point to the film Murder in 1930, and it's worth reading the book about the biography which Patricia Hitchcock wrote about her mother with Laurent Bouzeman about that, because Alma wrote the screenplay for Murder, co-wrote it. She also wrote the heroine as being very complex and worked on the film's structure. So a lot of people, because of a sympathy for the female protagonist, they often quote Murder from 1930 as an Alma touch. But her touch, because she was an editor, and she started as an editor on Woman to Woman for Gainsborough, which Hitchcock first met her in 1922. And then they went to Germany together to UFA Studios, and she became his assistant for The Pleasure Garden and was very much a hands-on, which is why I can see he would say that she was a person of many hands, because she was actually the actress who went to pick up the 2 actresses from the liner from America, because they used American stars for the picture. And so she was very much his right hand, as well as many other hands in the production.
So obviously, yeah, we've had Blackmail in 1929, and then we kind of move on in the 1930s to, I guess, what you could describe as like is thriller period. Would that be is thriller or wartime? Well,
Tony, in the 1930s, and again, I work on this. I devote a whole chapter. It's called the British Sextet. So there's 6 films which he became internationally famous for, starting with The Man Who Knew Too Much, and ending with Young and Innocent. And within that, you've got The 39 Steps, you've got Sabotage, which we've spoken about. So there are 6 films. You've got The Lady Vanishes, very famous film, which really put Hitchcock on the map to America. So The 39 Steps and The Lady Vanishes, and I do write a whole chapter about it in A Century of Hitchcock.
It sounds like this book is gonna do very well, because it's I don't know if anyone's gone quite this comprehensive before, so it's exciting. And when does that come out next year? Is it May? Did you say?
It comes out in June.
Sorry.
Early June, and you can pre-order it now. And it's really been 25 years of my life amongst writing all the other Hitchcock books, and I couldn't publish a lot of material before. But I think it's going to really change Hitchcock's legacy, which I'm very excited about.
Amazing.
And where can people order this from, Tony?
You can go on Amazon, or you can go on the University Press Kentucky. But you can order it almost anywhere on the internet now, because Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, wherever you're situated, you could just log on.
Well, it'll be on my shelf. Brill. So we've got you call it the British Sextet. That's what you called this, right? Okay, bro. So most of these are, and these are there's quite a lot of thrillers in here, and so I've recently watched. So from this era, I recently watched the 39 Steps, and I also watched Sabotage. I've done quite a few. I've got to say, Sabotage is probably my favourite out of all of the films that I watched lately. But obviously, 39 Steps is a massive one, and that was one that was just. They'd been on my shelf for a while, and I was like, right, now's the time. And I just found that the chemistry between Robert Donat and Madeleine Carroll is just it almost reminded me of It Happened One Night. The way these 2 characters kind of are so like, well, they dislike each other, they love each other, and it kind of at the end I found a little bit abrupt, but overall, yeah, it's a classic for a reason. It was brilliant. So
it's also
I agree. I love it.
I love the Hitchcock films where it's kind of the ending is kind of what do you want to happen, but you know their lives aren't going to be easy afterwards. Like, there's quite a few Hitchcock films which end on that note. So it's like, it's not a happy ending, it's not a sad ending, it's things are complicated from here on in, which is actually quite a good reflection of life in general, rather than trying to wrap it up in a bow. So a lot of films in general from that era are very, and fun,
Happily Ever After.
Happily Ever After, what have you. And I feel like very rarely do you get that with Hitchcock films. We'll get into it, but when later when Hitchcock did Suspicion, I feel like that's a film with an ending which clearly is not what he intended to do and which got switched out for something else, and I'm pretty sure I've read that's the case. But yeah, I like his morally complicated endings, let's say, when, in Sabotage, is it murder, is it self-defense, was it an accident, like who knows, and that's kind of how it's left for you. So
yeah, can we highlight to the audience that actually so a lot of our listeners just enjoy watching along with us, and they, well, obviously they listen to hear our opinions. I just would like to highlight from Hitchcock's early work, the film Sabotage from 1936 is unbelievable. It's on, you can see it on Prime, but it's a terrible copy, so it's free on Prime. It's almost unwatchable, so you can find it on YouTube. So a lot of these really old films are on YouTube and they're better quality. So Sabotage from 1936, and this is a film. It's a bomb plot, and it's Carl Anton Verloc and his wife own a small cinema in a quiet London suburb where they live seemingly happy. But Mrs. Verloc does not know that her husband has a secret that will affect their relationship and threaten her teenage brother's life. And this probably is one of the darkest Hitchcock films I have seen. Full stop. I can't believe they did this in the 30s.
Yeah,
the build of tension. It was one of the first. I'm sure maybe because this is, well, I said it's not quite late on, but he's done a fair few films by this point, and I haven't seen every single one of them, so I can't say for sure. Maybe Tony might know better than me. Well, he will. But the build up of tension for the clock ticking. He's done interviews about this, and it's about. Did he say so? There's a quote about the bomb. Is it suspense or suspense?
Yes. But basically, it's a classic definition of a difference between mystery and suspense. Mystery, who we said, is an intellectual process, like a whodunit, like who killed Cock Robin, or who killed in Cluedo, who killed Mrs. Peacock, or whatever. But suspense is an emotional process. You've got to give the audience information to elicit suspense, whether you know that there's a bomb under the table and it's going to explode in 5 minutes. That's 5 minutes of suspense. Or, Marnie's about to rob a safe, or her shoe is falling out of her coat, but she doesn't know. That's suspense because the audience knows. So you got to give the audience information. He was very clear about that.
Yeah, and in Sabotage specifically, there's it's such a well done scene of there's a clock ticking down, and I won't. I don't want to spoil anything. Actually, I think it's important that we don't. But he just adds so many layers and things that will make you feel even worse if this thing happens. Like a puppy, for example, and it's just
the puppy got me. That was a real sell of like, oh, they won't harm the puppy.
Yeah,
especially not in 1930, whatever it was.
It's absolutely genius. And so I just think that Sabotage isn't one to be overlooked. It was my favourite of all of. I mean, obviously you've got stuff like Rebecca as well, which we reviewed a few podcasts ago, so you can go back and hear what we had to say about that.
But that's when he's gone stateside by that point, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm guessing that's the first
out of the British
stateside
films.
picture. Yeah.
It really, for me, Sabotage is my favourite, and I wouldn't be able to say it's his best, but it's definitely my favourite.
Tony, just to say, sorry, I read your book on Marnie last year.
The revised edition. It's a long read, I know.
So I'm trying to get Jamie's not seen Marnie yet, but before we do that episode, he has to come and watch it with me, because of that era, I feel like Marnie's probably the last truly great one for me, and I know some people don't agree on that anyway, but I think it's like it feels like a bit of a turning point for me when I've watched it and watched what follows afterwards. And again, maybe it's the whole it's the last score with Bernard Herrmann, and then you've got Torn Curtain afterwards, and then things start to disintegrate a little bit for me. But it's interesting. So anyway,
I mean, if you'd like me to splice in a question about that, John, I can, because I have one. Tony, in your opinion, why, or even if you agree, why was there such a tail off in quality from the Birds, Marnie, to Torn Curtain and Topaz Family Plot? Why do you think there's such a big tail off in terms of quality?
Well, as Jonathan said, it was the end of the Hitchcock crew with Marnie. Robert Burks, his cinematographer, who he had worked with probably for the last 13, 40 years, sadly died in a house fire after Marnie. He also lost his friendship and collaboration with Bernard Herrmann. They had a big falling out on Torn Curtain over the score. And Herrmann, as you were saying, was instrumental for North by Northwest, Vertigo, Psycho, and Marnie, making all those great scores. It was the last, what people call the Hitchcock blonde, in terms of a kind of heroine, which he was very fond of, obviously, since Ingrid Bergman and Grace Kelly.
Yeah.
So it was, and also cinema was changing. VistaVision, studio filming was seen as archaic, and Hitchcock loved control. He liked controlling the lighting, and he couldn't control the weather, which is why he disliked going outside. They had a lot of trouble filming The Birds because of the outside shooting in Bodega Bay. So for a lot of reasons, I think Marnie was the end of what people call, or uncharitably, some people say it's the start of his decline. So it depends who you speak to.
I see it the other way around. Just getting that down there. But it is interesting. For me, it annoyed me more because on the Hitchcock Blu-ray for Torn Curtain, you can listen to the score Bernard Herrmann had created, and you're listening to it going, this is way better with this piece of music. Why the hell have we switched? I remember with Torn Curtain, sorry Joe, I'm jumping ahead, but it's interesting to tell you about it. In Torn Curtain, there's a sequence where it's supposed to be building tension on a bus, and I suppose now I can link it back potentially to Sabotage, and it's just not there. The music is just so out of whack with what is actually happening on screen, and the lack of tension because of the musical choice. And it's not even a purposeful juxtaposition. It's just, my understanding is the studio wanted something that was more popular and more trendy, and Hitchcock's style was on the wane, so they were like, they were able to give him more suggestions. But when you hear the Bernard Herrmann score and compare it, it's far better. But I suppose their argument was that era is coming to a close, that's dated, and that's what they're trying to get past. But now, all these years later, looking back, those kind of films that fit that motif and brief of the Bernard Herrmann and that combination are the ones that have a nostalgic quality to me. Of I don't know, they're just the ones that seem to be when it all comes together. I think that period, I mean, Jamie talked about it being the greatest period. I think it is all those US ones, pretty much all the US VistaVision ones onwards, just feel like absolute bliss. And any 4K release, Blu-ray, whatever it is, they always look stunning. The scripts are tight. Like, I don't know, it's. Yeah.
I know that I say it's the greatest decade by a single director, but I'm sure someone will tell me Chris Nolan's decade where he directed the Dark Knight trilogy is better. But okay. Before he goes to America, before he goes to Hollywood, he makes one last film, I believe, and that was Jamaica Inn.
That's right.
Tony,
so I've not been able to access Jamaica Inn. Have you got it on a Blu-ray, Jamie?
It's on Arrow Blu-ray, so you can go to Arrow and find that on Blu-ray. Yeah. Tony, could you give any insight to when Hitchcock encountered Charles Lawton and how that worked out?
Well, Charles Lawton, very famous character actor. From my understanding, it was kind of an obligation to make Jamaica Inn just before he moved to Hollywood to work with Selznick. He just had an obligation with the studio, and I believe it's Mayflower Productions. Because he was moving from studio to studio. So it was really kind of tying up the pieces. And the overacting of Charles Lawton, I don't think Hitchcock enjoyed. He didn't like being controlled. It was kind of foreshadowing the kind of battles he would have with Selznick. He was very much... Hitchcock loved jigsaw editing and jigsaw cutting, which is only set ways, and that's where he got into a lot of kind of standoff with someone like Charles Laughton, or most famously with Selznick.
So to clarify for an audience, that's not shooting basically the master backup shot. So like normally some directors would get like a whole take, which is the sequence in one clear way, and then you shoot coverage afterwards to like add into it. But Hitchcock kind of was like, I know how this is going to look. I've boarded it out. This is what I'm going to do. But it meant in the edit, you were more limited because you don't have those options. I'd say the problem with a lot of modern films is there's a lot of not pre-planning, a lot of shooting on green screen. And the idea is you can change anything afterwards and get a lot of coverage. And that's kind of the difference. And I think you can really tell with the artistry of earlier films where you don't have that choice. But yeah, Hitchcock is a great example of someone. He said that it was almost like a chore to him to film these films because he'd planned it all in his head. He'd seen the script, he's got all the notes, he's got the boards, and it's like, oh, now I've got to film it. And it's interesting to me, and James going to tell me off because I'm going to reference a modern director, but David Fincher did a film called Panic Room, which was one of the first films where he really got into using the pre-visualization technique of that era, which was with the CG, and he hated directing that film because he said he'd already seen the entire thing, planned it out, to the point where he made him realise he'd overplanned. It almost was not a fun creative process because he's like, I've already made the film and now I can't get it out the way I want it to. And it's really interesting hearing someone go, they've gone that far down that route and it's that frustrating for them to produce it. And apparently that's also why Hitchcock he looked below the camera, didn't he? He didn't like look through the lens, he primed it, through the viewfinder. He prided himself on knowing how it would look just by the lens choice. But
yeah, interesting. So obviously, so after he's made Jamaica in with Charles Laughton, who he wasn't a fan of. I think Charles Laughton might have owned the production company, which is why he got to call a bit more of the shots than Hitchcock would have liked because he's very, very used to being in control. Then finally, he got his 4-picture deal in America with David O. Selznick in 1938. And the reason why he got this deal, Tony, so he was moving around a couple of studios because he wasn't particularly happy with the opportunities he was getting. That's right, isn't it?
Partly that, and also you have to remember the war was coming to Europe, which was a really big factor, and so the studios were shutting down. And Hitchcock recognised that the American production was superior, the American studio systems in terms of the lighting and the crew. And it was a combination of that. And with Selznick, Selznick's brother was Myron Selznick, who was also an agent with Hitchcock. And so they had that friendship. And Hitchcock just had tremendous success with first the 39 Steps, but it was The Lady Vanishes, which was really his calling card. And Selznick recognised that. Selznick at the time was making Gone with the Wind, so he was very wrapped up in that huge production. But he had also he wanted Hitchcock actually to come and make his first film on the Titanic. It was going to be a remake of the Titanic disaster. But then they switched that to Rebecca, the Daphne du Maurier novel. And Hitchcock was asked to direct. And you say it's a 4-picture deal. In my book, I call it a 7-year contract. And I think it's a combination of the two because I think after 7 years, after Notorious and Spellbound and the Paradine case, their contract did come to an end. So Rebecca was obviously the very big picture, which put Hitchcock in America. He came over on the Queen Mary. And just to plug myself, I'm actually doing a Queen Mary talk on the Queen Mary 2 this December. If anyone's free on the 15th, we're doing a Hitchcock voyage of 4 talks. Amazing. So we'll be sailing to New York and talking about his transatlantic crossing and showing clips from Notorious and the 39 Steps. And so Hitchcock moved over to America with his wife, Alma, 8-year-old Patricia, and their various dogs, spaniels and entourage.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Oh,
Tony, could you tell us a little bit about Rebecca? Because I'll be honest, we reviewed it on the pod not that long ago, but when did you first see it? Thoughts on it? Because it's obviously the first US production.
Yeah.
And it is a change of pace watching it, and there is that kind of lavish Hollywood glitz and glamour on it. I mean, Jamie and I watched some amazing behind the scenes about miniatures and things that were used in ways that you wouldn't expect, like forced perspective, etc. Tell us a little bit about your experience with Rebecca.
Well, I cover a chapter on it in my storyboards book, as you've probably seen, mainly because of the famous storyboard artist who probably many people don't know of, called Dorothea Holt. She was really a pioneer in the industry. She famously designed the sets for Gone with the Wind. So she was working for Selznick already, and he recognized her talent. She famously said she had to draw that Tara staircase a damn 64 times because Selznick kept asking her to do it again and again, that famous staircase in the house Tara and Gone with the Wind. And so she would draw sketches of Mandalay, the famous house in Rebecca. She was very interested in period furnishings and detail, so she would research that in the library in California. And like many of Hitchcock's storyboard artists and production designers, she came from an architectural background, from a university in LA. And then they all moved from architecture to studio work during the Depression. And that makes complete sense because the studios were booming and films of escapism and big set designs. So their talents were utilized. So I approached the storyboards, but very much through Dorothea Holt. She loved working with Hitchcock, she said. They were kind of simpatico because they both came from that kind of architectural drawing background. Hitchcock wasn't a huge fan of Rebecca. He said it was like a novel, a very period play which he tried to give life to. He was satisfied with Laurence Olivier, who was a great character actor in it. And famously, they tormented Joan Fontaine into giving that kind of very scared, mousy performance because he would go around saying, "Oh, the cast don't like you. Larry wants to get rid of you because he wants his wife, Vivian Leigh, for the part." But it was like superb psychological direction because I think Joan Fontaine's great in Rebecca. She really epitomizes that scared, mousy second Mrs. De Winter. So it's I'm not a huge fan of Rebecca, but it always seems to be on BBC Two, round about Christmas or Easter. So
a classic film that gets the run out.
You can't avoid it, but there are various Hitchcock flourishes.
Yeah.
One of which most famous I talk about in one of my books. He got very drunk one night at the Chelsea Arts Ball, and that's where the kind of vertigo shot came from. He suddenly realised that everything was zooming away from him. And so he recreated that in Rebecca and then to perfection in Vertigo.
Yeah.
The kind of like the tease into Joan Fontaine, that we've only just covered The Shining. When actually Stanley Kubrick was allegedly doing something similar to Shelley Duvall on set. Just these are small little things like to wind her up and kind of get her in character and get her kind of thinking. So that's really interesting. So I just wanted to I was going to mention. With Hitchcock, he seems to have this. He loves trains, doesn't he?
Yes, he loved train travel.
Yeah, and so it's because it appears in a lot of his films. And I was going to mention earlier on, like the first film that he actually appears in was The Lodger, and that was because someone was late to set, and he's like, right, fine, I'll do it. And so from there, he continued being in his films, and he would always want to arrive in the films early on so he could get out of the way, and so people weren't kind of waiting for him, and it would kind of take them away from what they're about to watch. So I just found it interesting because obviously you've got him appearing in playing cards in Shadow of a Doubt. He's going on a train with a cello in Strangers on a Train. And it's just funny that he's got these like callbacks all the time to certain things, and as you mentioned earlier, Tony, food. He's always got like lavish food in his films, and he speaks a lot about the cooks, so the chefs, and saying it's one of the four most important people on set or something.
You've got to also think about that period, and we spoke about this with the Bond books later, which is travel was a luxury at this point that wasn't very common. Like, it's very hard to think now on a Jet2 holiday you can go anywhere you want to go. Back then, like that's not the case. So films were the escapism to present these things. But I think part of the reason the Bond films don't always kick the same way they used to is because Bond books used to literally describe in great detail all these brands of things you'd never be able to afford and all this luxurious food. And it's like, Hitchcock presents that in these films, especially around this period, ever so much so.
That's right. Yeah, he loved travel, train travel. We mentioned the Queen Mary. He loved traveling on ocean liners. because he enjoyed just like good food, good wine, and just luxury travel.
Can I ask you, Tony, about in this era? I'm looking at Suspicion because that's probably one of my favourites from the 40s. Again, Cary Grant, Joan Fontaine. It was interesting to me because although it's in America, it could be a UK, the kind of like that weird transatlantic kind of where is this based. Tell us a little bit about when you've seen Suspicion, what you think of it, that kind of thing. I'm just intrigued.
Yeah, again, it's not a huge favourite, but it's very interesting how he manipulates the audience, because the premise of Suspicion, Joan Fontaine plays a very kind of spinstery woman, even though she's never married, and Cary Grant plays a cad very well, and she slowly becomes very suspicious about his character and is convinced at the end that he's trying to murder her. And there's that very famous scene when he brings up a glass of milk to her in bed, and Hitchcock lights a milk luminously with a bulb, and so it's just glowing, and he's very sinister. And he wanted to end Suspicion in a different way. The ending, actually, not to spoil it, is that it was all in Joan Fontaine's mind that he was a murderer. But the way Hitchcock wanted to do it, he wanted for her to drink the glass of milk. It was really be full of poison. She realizes that, and she's written a letter to say her mother, saying her husband is going to kill me. And she gives it to Cary Grant, who then, after he kills her, poisons her, he pops a letter in the post box. But that's just a shame he didn't do that, actually, as a finale.
I'm pretty sure I read that exact telling in one of your books, to be completely honest. But yeah, I that for me feels like we just talked about in Sabotage, an ending which was so shocking and what you wouldn't expect. And it felt to me when I watched Suspicion, that was an ending which had been catered for an audience and being like, oh, well, we can't possibly have Cary Grant be like, not a chance in hell, we'll make it work. And it felt like if it had that ending, I feel like it would be a more popular film. And like it's sometimes with films, some of the most interesting ones are the what ifs. They're not perfect as the possibilities of what they could have been, and I feel like that's one of those films from that era where I feel that way. And the other one I wanted to talk about from then was Shadow of a Doubt. Hitchcock has quoted it as being potentially one of his favourites, and I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts on that and what you know about it.
Sure. Well, I had the pleasure of doing a chapter again on Shadow of a Doubt for the Storyboards book, because Hitchcock always cited it as his favourite film. It was the first time he really became grips to America, first American film in 1942, even though he'd been in America for like three years by that point. But he really got to grips with, he was working with Thornton Wilder, screenwriter of Our Town, and they really personified the blue velvet of the small town community, where there could be a psychopath in the midst, in this case, Uncle Charlie, has that kind of relations with niece Charlie. And so I actually went to Santa Rosa for part of my research, and I drove down the road, MacDonald Avenue, to see the house. And again, it's classic suburban town in America. Santa Rosa has grown since then, but just north of San Francisco, on the edges of the wine country.
White picket fence.
Yes, very much. Neighbours, that perfect kind of nuclear family with a post office, a library, which famously closes, a policeman, and all those things. The kind of small town life which Hitchcock brings to life. And in the middle of that, you put in the killer, that evil lurks, and he arrives by train himself.
I was about to say,
there's a big cloud of smoke, like the devil comes. It's just great Hitchcock.
It is like the films you've just mentioned, Suspicion, Shadow of a Doubt. That is kind of the more psychological, those thrillers that he was exploring at that point. Obviously, he did Lifeboat after those, which I'm dying to talk about because it's another one of my favorites. But yeah, Shadow of a Doubt, it reminded me. You can see where films like Night of the Hunter from 1955, which is again one of my absolute favorites. You can see where they've kind of got inspiration from almost, and that Hitchcock was doing these things very, very early on. It's just really interesting to see, and I really like Shadow of a Doubt, but again, the two that really, really stood out for me from this era was, as I mentioned earlier, Sabotage, and I would just like to talk about Lifeboat. So obviously he had a few wartime thrillers. I haven't seen Foreign Correspondent. Am I right in thinking that Selznick loaned out Hitchcock to another studio for this one? Is that right? Or was
Yes,
that
I think he did.
Yeah.
I'll double check on that, but I remember that to be the case.
But yeah, so apparently, Selznick had signed him up for these. You said it was a 7-year deal, but he was allowed. It was in his contract that he could go and do work for other studios as well. So I don't know. I don't have that written down, so I don't know if it's 100% true. But I've took copious notes. Tony's. The beauty of this is Tony's doing this with 0 notes in front of him because he just knows it.
He knows.
Yeah. So obviously we had these wartime thrillers as well, like anti-fascist themes. So we've got Foreign Correspondent, Saboteur, Lifeboat. Saboteur I quite liked. I didn't love it as much as the others. I don't know why. I don't know whether it was because I'd already watched the 39 Steps and I felt like that was...
It may have been proximity of how closely you'd watched those two quite similar films together, potentially.
I think so. But yeah, the one that stood out the most was Lifeboat. Very different to a lot of the films that I'd seen from him. One location, and back then, a one location thriller like that. And again, it had me thinking. You can just... I watch loads of old films, so again, you can just see where people have got loads of influences from. It's 12 Angry Men. Like, I'm watching this and I'm like, this is one location, and it's all of these characters playing off each other, and I'm like, this 12 Angry Men was way after Lifeboat.
It also reminded me, it also reminded me on rewatch as well of Rope, which is another one location, characters, how it all unravels. Moral ambiguity, all of it, the tension of knowing it's going to unravel and just and waiting for that to happen.
The confined set, again, what we were saying about Hitchcock being an experimenter and a groundbreaker and a provocateur, he wanted to experiment and he wanted to push himself, and he did that with the confined sets in Lifeboat and Rope, or whether it's the continuous tracking shots which he did with Rope and Under Capricorn, those kind of long takes. And he was very interested in taking a microcosm of society, whether it's with Lifeboat or famously that scene in The Birds when they're all arguing inside the Tides restaurant. Yeah. He wanted to take that cross-section of people. What would happen if you take that cross-section? And in Lifeboat, you've got those different archetypes all together on that lifeboat, and so that's what really interested him.
I also like in Lifeboat the kind of less is more approach with the initial shot of seeing the sinking of the U-boat, at the start. Sorry, seeing the sinking of the initial ship at the start of the film, and essentially it's just one piece going down, but your mind just fills in the blanks, and it was just a good example of just we're so used to having to see everything now in a certain way, or it's depicted in a way, and it's like it treats the audience in an intelligent fashion. And also it's a weird one, isn't it, because I know at this point it's definitely wartime at this point. It's 1944, and it humanizes the German characters at points. It also demonizes them. It's like, are they going stir crazy because they're on the boat? Again, it's that ambiguity of like where it's at. It tries to get across the idea of not everyone is obviously evil just because they're the enemy. He's a boy. And how it leads, and in the finale, and it's also more interesting to me because the fact it was during the war. This is made during when it was happening, rather than like a retrospective look and having these ideas is one thing, but to be able to do that and produce that at the time, was it received well critically at that time, or was it quite controversial? I'm intrigued.
Well, it's one of the films I think he was nominated for Best Director, because he was nominated for 5 films, wasn't he?
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
Yes, exactly. So, Rear Window, Lifeboat, Rebecca, Psycho, and there's one more. It will come to me, but he was nominated for 5 films.
While we're on that subject, why do you think that Hitchcock was so overlooked in that regard, because a man that's done so many. I would go out there and say, like, he's got about 5 or 6 masterpieces, and the majority of them are also just very, very good. So why do you think that the Academy did continually overlook him?
I think it was snobbery because of thriller genres. Spellbound was actually the 5th one out of the 5 I mentioned. Yeah, okay. And so those 5 films, when you think of them, they were classed as thrillers. Psycho, Rear Window. Out of the 5 of them, I think he deserves to win it for Rear Window. Absolutely.
Speaking of One Location.
Yeah. And all the other, dramas going on around that fabulous set. So I think he wasn't recognised at the time, and it took a great deal of time. I chart this in all my books, really, certainly in Century of Hitchcock, as well as the Marnie book, about until the French New Wave directors and Francois Truffaut began the campaign in the 60s, and Claude Chabrol earlier in the late 50s. They were campaigning for Hitchcock, but it took American critics a while.
Do you think also, I'd read previously, and again, this may have been from one of your books, was the fact of the British public weren't happy with the fact he went over to the States in the war, and then, because there was an idea of directors at that point should be making more war propaganda, etc. Do you think that's potentially part of it, or not so much?
Certainly, I covered a little bit about that in the Century of Hitchcock. Michael Balcon was very upset when Hitchcock left. He saw it as a betrayal. They eventually made up, but during the war, he felt that Hitchcock had abandoned the war effort and British filmmakers. But I think certainly, and I think there was resentment with some of the British critics, because he always said, the critics mean well. they were very mean in terms of their reviews, especially certain critics like Penelope Houston in Sight and Sound, for example. She would often write scathing reviews. I remember one about Psycho. So yes, I think that's probably has a fair element to it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jamie, you go.
I was just going to say, a lot of the time, the Academy, particularly, and film critics, it's the same with directors today, like Tarantino, for example. They don't like that kind of edgy, or I guess like Hitchcock back then was doing things that he was subverting expectations, and it was always his bad guys. The bad guys in his films were always charming and polite, and sometimes they would win, and I think that really doesn't go down well with the Academy and critics sometimes as well, because they want their kind of Hollywood ending. So that we've seen loads of directors over the years get snubbed, but none so with such a vast catalogue like Hitchcock.
While we're on that theme, I'd love to go into Selznick's neck. I feel like I want to talk about Spellbound, because Spellbound feels very Selznick. It feels like another stab at trying to do something like Rebecca. It's interesting to me. I enjoyed it. I actually watched it for the first time last week. I really enjoyed it, but it's another one where it's not quite there. Like it's got all the key ingredients, but they've not quite arranged just right. Cast-wise, you've got Ingrid Bergman and with Gregory Peck. And it's that fascination he has with psychoanalysis of that time has started to become popular. And when it's very sometimes of that era, it's very on the nose with describing exactly what the people are, the study of, and quote basically like a citation from a book. But it's got also an incredible sequence a dream sequence that was aided by Salvador Dali, which I heard was originally 20 minutes. Would love to see that somewhere, please. Tony, just want to hear your thoughts on Spellbound, etc.
Yeah, well, I investigated Spellbound, and I did a whole chapter for the storyboards book, mainly because of Salvador Dali, because we knew it would be a big sell to have Salvador Dali images in the book, and because he was such a name, and that's what Hitchcock was good at, the gimmicks, the marketing, and he knew that Dali would bring an audience, even though it was truncated to like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Originally, Dali had all these ideas of Bergman turning into a statue, and then the statue disintegrating into ants, which just wasn't practical. And Selznick, when he saw the script for this sequence, he just tore it up and said this is unworkable, and he had one of his designers, James Bafisi, to rework it for filming, because a lot of Dali's fanciful images just weren't practical on a studio. But he certainly brought the marketing to the film, and most people remember the Dali sequence when they think of Spellbound. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting with psychoanalysis, because Selznick himself was in psychoanalysis at the time, and they used the his psychiatrist as the film's kind of coordinator and consultant. But also, if you think it came out in 1944, and a lot of soldiers were returning from the war, many were traumatized, many had were shock, and many were having nightmares and dreams. So it was actually very timely as well. Hitchcock was very good at tapping into the zeitgeist of a culture.
Yeah, it's as I said, it was an interesting one for me. First time watch. It felt sometimes with the Selznick one, I say the Selznick ones, with this and Rebecca, sometimes they feel like Hitchcock said, it felt more like an adaptation of a book. I know Spellbound is not, but that kind of the way it's presented doesn't flow as easily off the tongue is the way I kind of describe it. It just doesn't seem to kind of flow quite as well. But the Dali sequence for me did really stand out. And again, that is something as a film student many years ago now. That is something that we've studied, but it's interesting you say some of the ideas they say couldn't be done, because Dali had made experimental films previously and had achieved some of these effects, but I think it was more probably not wanting it to be a studio film, rather than it can't be done, more than we don't want to weird the audience out too much, cutting of eyes, etc. It was
really fascinating researching that. I spoke to people who looking at the eye motifs of Dali, going back to Shianandu, the famous film by Brunel, I think in the 20s, the scissors with the man with the maskless face. You remember the melting clocks, the melting wheels. All of these are kind of Salvador Dali tropes, which he weaved into the dream sequence in some shape or form.
Yeah, absolutely
amazing.
Sorry, Jamie, went on a tangent on Spellbound.
Listen, I'm a happy passenger. It's lovely hearing you chat about it. I am conscious of time, Alex. We are. Tony's been on with us for quite a while. I don't want to abuse his time. But I did want to finish with a couple of little questions. Obviously, you've alluded to a few of the films that aren't your favourites. And obviously, you've written books on films that might be your favourite. So, Tony, what in your opinion? What are your favourite 3 Hitchcock films, and which one do you think is his best?
Well, they say if you've read Robin Wood's book, which you probably have, which Hitchcock fan hasn't read Robin Wood's book? He says there's an unbroken string of masterpieces from North by Northwest to Marnie. From Vertigo to Marnie. So it begins with Vertigo. You've got Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, The Birds, and Marnie. There's even some argument, the last half of Psycho isn't on par with the rest, and a lot of people do protest about Marnie. But those 5 films really stand up. I would say Vertigo is up there, as obviously it's up there in the Sight and Sound poll as number 1 film in 2012, and just recently got knocked down to number 2. But in terms of influencing directors and filmmakers and critics, but I would probably say, as his most famous film, even though it's not perfect, Psycho, just because it was, as we were alluding to earlier, because it's so groundbreaking. It's like Hitchcock's Picasso Cubist period in filmmaking, isn't it? It's him just ripping up the rule books all together and
reinventing himself at that period as well.
Reinventing the genre.
The amount of people that the amount of things he does in that still get replicated today, like Scream, for example, in the mid 90s. You have at the beginning of Scream, you've got Drew Barrymore, huge actress at the time, and they kill her right at the start of Scream.
The bait and switch, as it was.
You think that she is going to be the character throughout this whole film, and this has been done 35 years ago in Psycho. So there's stuff that he was that's unbelievable, I think. And I was going to say earlier when we briefly touched on Psycho, I still think the scene when it's looking down at the staircase, and she's running in and running up the stairs. That is, to this day, like I am not easily scared by horror films, but that scares me every time. There's something about the speed of it, and it's incredible. Yeah. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
you were saying
absolutely.
Psycho?
And so amongst those 5 films, though, I would say North by Northwest is probably the most perfect. Because you can play it on a loop. Cary Grant is just incredible in it. The locations, it's got all the classic ingredients, as we were saying. The wrongfully accused man. It's a real crowd pleaser. It's got a fantastic Bernard Herrmann score.
It's quite happy for a Hitchcock.
I've watched North by Northwest with general audiences. I've watched it in outdoor cinemas. You know, it's not a film people can complain about. People can quibble about Vertigo, it's too slow. About Marnie, you know, it's unrealistic, or the birds, the special effects are dubious now. But no one can complain about North by Northwest because it's so classic. And it's just the epitome of Hitchcock's classicism, from the costumes to the architecture. You know, it looks just so modern even today with the Frank Lloyd Wright. That's Hitchcock was so good at.
Tony, just conscious, one of the films we didn't talk about from the era just before we... Oh, sorry, Joe, I know you are wrapping through.
Right.
Rope, we touched on briefly the one location and how that pans out. Interesting experiment, because Rope is obviously lots of 10-minute takes, like, assembled together to look like one continuous take.
Yeah.
Thoughts about Rope in general?
Yes. Yeah, I loved Rope when I first saw it. I think I first saw it when I was 18 on those VHS videos, you know, in the local store. And like everyone, I was very intrigued by the plot. I thought Brandon Dahl was fantastic in it. And again, he comes from a long line of just crazy psychopaths, which the audience kind of root for because he's very charismatic and charming. Yeah. And so you can trace him all the way, you know. Robert Walker follows him in Strangers on the Train, and then even Bob Rusk in Frenzy. So there's, Anthony Perkins obviously in Psycho. So you can like draw a clear line through all of them. But yes, I think Rope is a very interesting experiment, and something. I think it's a little stagey just because the long takes are a little bit gimmicky, and simple cuts would have probably been less distracting than zooming into someone's jacket and coming out again, for example. Yes. Yeah. But that was just Hitchcock during his time wanting to do a kind of continuous camera.
Yeah.
Love it.
Cool. Bro, so I've got one question before we wrap up, and then we'll quickly we'll talk about Tony will promote his book and his upcoming work again, and we can just talk about the next episode along with our cinema episode. So David Ellis writes in, just like you can, on moviesinapodshot@gmail.com, or I usually put a little question sticker out on Instagram a few days before, and he says, given that Hitchcock is known as a perfectionist, how did that impact on his crew, especially the writers and cinematographers he worked with? Do they deserve more credit, or were they really just servicing his vision, and what were they told?
A very interesting question. It's one I do a big deep dive in A Century of Hitchcock, because I was benefited from some great transcripts from a British Entertainment History project, and they interviewed all the old boys about 20, 30 years ago, and really fascinating reading. So I was reading the transcripts of screenwriters, camera crew, assistants. Most of them loved Hitchcock and thought he was a perfectionist, and learnt so much from him on the 39 Steps or The Lady Vanishes. But there was some instances from the screenwriters. There are two of them called Frank Launder and Sidney Gilliat, and they felt that they had adapted The Lady Vanishes but didn't deserve didn't get enough credit from Hitchcock. And there's some very funny transcription involved when they write to Hitchcock, pretending that they're writing to his mother, saying, "Dear Mrs. Hitchcock, your son doesn't play fair, he steals all the marbles." And so Hitchcock got very upset. It's all in the book from a transcript I found. But there is a long line of screenwriters, famously John Michael Hayes, who did a lot of Hitchcock's great work in the 1950s. And even Evan Hunter, who I interviewed for The Birds and Marnie, he was very upset when he had some scenes rewritten for the birds, specifically the sand dune scene when they go
Yes.
up, Rod Taylor and Tippi Hedren. And so Hitchcock wasn't a great one about giving credit. I think it's been exaggerated by some biographers, which I deep dive into the whole book, which is what essentially Hitchcock is about. I really dispel the myth of him having a dark side. I've come to a lot of firm conclusions and proof about that, which I'm very happy to discuss in detail with you. Yeah, I think it is fair to say that he wasn't overly generous. A lot of times he would say to a screenwriter, "Oh, Alma enjoyed it." That was his way of saying, you did a good job. He would say that to Joseph Stefano, who wrote Psycho. "Oh, Alma thought you did a good job or enjoyed reading it." But I think it was partly his character just protecting his director's vision. And I've worked with a few directors in my time who are actually quite like that.
Yeah.
They see themselves as the auteur and they don't want to give credit to anyone else.
No, well, and so actually, I have seen some of your some interviews and stuff like that, and so I would actually be really we'll if you're interested in coming on again, like, so obviously we're going to go into and I don't want to put you on the spot, so you don't have to agree here. So just let us know over email. I know it's a big ask. It's your free time, but I would be really intrigued to hear, because I know that we learned through research on our Shining episode actually that someone had uncovered loads of stuff just by doing reading lots of different books, transcripts, all sorts, and discovered that actually like this common misconception that Stanley Kubrick really mistreated Shelley Duvall isn't actually true.
Yeah.
And so when obviously I've seen some people have this there's a massive thing about Tippi Hedren and the way he treated Tippi Hedren and the way he treated lots of his actors actually. And so I did see that you were speaking briefly about how these myths have been dispelled, and that actually why would these actors go back to work with him again and again and again if he was an absolute tyrant. So I would be really excited to hear your take on that if you do decide to come back on for our mid 50s episode and our later episodes.
I'll be very happy because I've kept it to myself for the last 25 years. But now I can finally share it because the book's coming out. So.
Was the reason? Did you have to keep it to yourself because of the research you were doing?
Partly that, and also because of Donald Spoto. He's a biographer of the dark side of genius.
Right.
He passed away 3 years ago. And so he was the one who was really championing the dark side. And I've found out that he actually had a big axe to grind with Hitchcock, and I'm very happy to share that with you now because the book's coming out, and it's really kind of Daily Mail mind-blowing stuff that I've uncovered.
Movies in a pod show, mind-blowing stuff apparently. So, but yeah, no, if we would absolutely we would love that. So yeah, if we'll be recording again probably in 2 weeks' time, I would say. So I don't know what your schedule's like, but we'll work around you. So whatever, you're so kind to give us your time that if usually around 2 weeks' time. So it would probably be if I look at the diary, the beginning of December. So we'll send you a few dates across. But yeah, we would love to have you back on. You've been such good value, and thank you so much again for giving us your time. And I think that the listeners are going to love this.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. It'd be a pleasure to come back.
Amazing. So one more time,
Thanks
Tony,
so much.
your book, tell us about it. When's it coming out and where can people buy it?
It's called A Century of Hitchcock. It's published in June next year for the centenary, published by University Press of Kentucky. It's 400 pages, and you can pretty much find it anywhere on the internet through all your local bookstores, but probably best through Amazon. They're likely to do a discount.
Amazing. And we're going to bust that myth.
And I can vouch for Tony, as I own the Storyboards book, which I have made my way through. I read The Making of Hitchcock, The Birds. It was a while ago. I think it's when I was travelling in Australia. And the Marnie book I only read fairly recently because you'd revised it, I believe. So, yeah.
John couldn't believe you were coming on. He's like, he's wrote some of these books that I've got. I'm like, well, yeah.
Do you know what? It's crazy because, you know, especially on Kindle, a lot of the books on Kindle, etc., how much you read and then here we are. So there
Well,
we go.
I think you'll enjoy my Alfred Hitchcock's Masterclass book. I've just revised that, the young Alfred Hitchcock's Masterclass. But it's aimed for people like yourselves and also film students. When you mentioned Tim Burton, that got me very interested because I'm actually going to revise that for the centenary and add a couple more chapters. But that's a book I'm always like putting up to date, whether it's with Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer or any of the new releases, because I think it's very interesting to see how he influences young people today and how he can target the TikTok and Instagram audience, because it's just so fiercely competitive now, everyone's attention span. And so Hitchcock can help, I think, with that.
Oh, amazing. Bro, so, yep, thank you so much, Tony. Thank you for the questions, everyone. Yes, you can go on. I'll put the link in the description for where you can find Tony's book. I'll put the link in the description for where you can book some tickets to go and see a Hitchcock double bill. And just it's going to be us two quickly introducing it and then sitting down and enjoying it with everyone else, where we're going to show Notorious and Vertigo back to back with a small toilet break in between. And the tickets are £12 because why do we want to make money? Stupid. Anyway, that is.
Will you be there in person?
We will be there in person.
Yes,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
We'll be there in person.
I will definitely have to try and make a trip up next time you do one of your screenings, because I'm not too far away. So.
Oh, amazing! Yeah, that would be really cool.
Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, we'll be there. We'll be sitting in the audience. We've managed to get ourselves a couple of comp seats, seeing as it was us that put on. But yeah, brilliant. John, anything else from you before we leave?
No, just thank you very much, Tony. Look forward to the next one.
Amazing, cool. Thank you so much, everyone, and yeah, we'll see you all later.